Okay, tonight's class is The American Crisis by Thomas Paine. He wrote it on December 23rd, 1776. Thomas Paine was probably America's first wartime correspondent. He wrote a lot of things about the soldiers in the field and what was going on. You know, Valley Forge was a horrible time. The men didn't have, our national government was impotent. They didn't have the ability to get bullets, beans, or uniforms to the men that were fighting. If it hadn't have been for Washington and one of his friends funding the war, it wouldn't have happened. Thomas Paine wrote an article where he said the men were naked in fact. They were worried that the Hessians would follow the bloody footprints through the snow back to their base camp. A lot of the men in Valley Forge were starving, so they would cut the leather off their shoes and boil it and eat it for something warm in their stomach. Most of them didn't have enough to stay warm. 24 hours after Thomas Paine wrote The Crisis, The American Crisis, you remember Washington crossed the Delaware, and so they were on the shore of the Delaware. And it was cold, it was winter, it was Christmas Eve. They couldn't start fires to stay warm, or the enemy would know that they were there. A lot of the men that died that day died by freezing to death on the bank of the river. But that was one of the Battle of Trenton was probably one of the most deciding battles, and that's what convinced the French to get involved and to help out with the battle, with the fight. And had that not happened, we would be learning a completely different history. Now, I happen to believe there's a poem by Mark Twain that I think had to have been inspired by the American Crisis. I just believe that Mark Twain read the American Crisis, and that's what spurred him to write this poem, but it's one of my favorite ones. He said, "In the beginning of a change, the patriot is a scarce man, and brave and hated and scorned. When his cause succeeds, the timid join him, for then it costs nothing to be a patriot." And that's the truth. That's self-evident truth. That's the truth in life. Very few people will jump into the fight. I saw that when I was running for sheriff. People go, "Well, are you going to win? I'll back you if you're going to win." Well, hello? Did you see the oxymoron in terms there? If you don't back me, I'm not going to win. Everybody wants to bet for the winner, right? Everybody loves a winner. Well, the principles always end up becoming the loser if you're always going for the winner. So you either stand on the principle or you don't. I used to have people tell me all the time, "Well, John, you know, you need to learn how to pick your battles." Well, I learned a long time ago that if you're living on principle, your battles pick you. You don't have a choice. And too many times we want to skirt our principles so that we can pick our battles. We don't get to pick our battles. Our battles pick us. And so you're either a patriot during the hard times, or you're just a timid person that becomes a patriot when there isn't any risk left. So let's get in. I think when we start into this, you're going to recognize a lot of the beginning, but this is so powerful, this American Crisis, that I think it's something that adds to and really helps understand the founding of this country. And so I think it's important that we study it. The Crisis by Thomas Paine, December 23rd, 1776. "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. What we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. It is dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven knows how to put a proper price upon its goods. And it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. Britain, with an army to enforce her tyranny, has declared that she has a right not only to tax, but to bind us in all cases whatsoever. Remember, that comes from the Declaratory Act. And if being bound in that manner is not slavery, then is there not such a thing as slavery upon earth? Even the expression is impious, for so unlimited a power can belong only to God. Whether the independence of this continent was declared too soon or delayed too long, I will not now enter into an argument. My own simple opinion is that had it been 8 months earlier, it would have been much better. We did not make a proper use of last winter, neither could we, while we were in a dependent state. However, the fault, if it were one, was all our own. We have none to blame but ourselves. But no great deal is lost yet. All that Howe has been doing this past month is rather a ravage than a conquest, which the spirit of the Jerseys a year ago would have quickly repulsed, and which time and a little resolution will soon recover. This kind of resonates for today, doesn't it? If we'd have started a little sooner. If we would have woke up just a little sooner, would we be in the arduous fight that we are now for our republic? Would we have China invading our sovereign airspace and us just going, oh well, if we'd have just started a little sooner maybe. I have as little superstition in me as any man living, but my secret opinion has ever been, and still is, that God Almighty will not give up a people to military destruction or leave them unsupportedly to perish who have so earnestly and so repeatedly sought to avoid the calamities of war by every decent method which wisdom could invent. Neither have I so much of the infidel in me as to suppose that he has relinquished the government of the world and given us up to the care of devils. And as I do not, I cannot see on what grounds the King of Britain can look up to heaven for help against us. A common murderer, a highwayman, or a housebreaker has as good a pretense as he. So he's comparing the king to people with not such good reputation. 'Tis surprising to see how rapidly a panic will sometimes run through a country. Now I want you to when we read this, I want you to understand it in today's context. So when you hear this, think about what's happening today. 'Tis surprising to see how rapidly a panic will sometimes run through a country. All nations and ages have been subject to them. Britain has trembled like an ague at the report of a French fleet of flat-bottomed boats. And in the 14th or 15th century, the whole English army, after ravaging the kingdom of France, was driven back like men petrified with fear. And this brave exploit was performed by a few broken forces collected and headed by a woman, Joan of Arc. Would that heaven might inspire some Jersey maid to spirit up her countrymen and save her fair fellow sufferers from ravage and ravagement? Yet panics, in some cases, have their uses. They produce as much good as hurt. Their duration is always short. The mind soon grows through them and acquires a firmer habit than before. But their peculiar advantage is that they are the touchstones of sincerity and hypocrisy, and bring things and men to light which might otherwise have lain forever undiscovered. In fact, they have the same effect on secret traitors which an imaginary apparition would have upon a private murderer. They sift out the hidden thoughts of man and hold them up in public to the world. Many a disgusted Tory has lately shown his head that shall penitently solemnize with curses the day on which Howe arrived upon the Delaware. Think about it, a panic. Rahm Emanuel said, never let a good crisis go to waste, right? World War I, Woodrow Wilson's propagandist, he told him, he said, I need you to turn the American public into war-loving patriots. And they sank a couple ships, and they did. And then World War II, we needed war-loving patriots. And do you think your American government did not know that the Japanese had a fleet headed towards Pearl Harbor? They sure did, because we needed to turn the people into war-loving patriots. And what about two of the longest wars we've had in history? Starting in 2001. Everybody remember that date? Turn the people into war-loving patriots. We had, General Eisenhower warned us against the military-industrial complex. And everything he told us has come true. We're there. So, everybody in this room should remember 2020. It should be fresh in our minds, right? So, and what did 2020 do with a lot of people? It divided that line, right? You could tell those that were of what spirit. It separated it very clearly, didn't it? We knew who was for government dependency and who wasn't. I got in a lot of trouble during that time because I said any Christian that says they're afraid to die and did all the things that they did has to reevaluate whether they're a Christian or not. If I'm a true Christian, death I do not fear. But chains and slavery I do. As I was with the troops at Fort Lee and marched with them to the edge of Pennsylvania, I am well acquainted with many circumstances which those who live at a distance know but little of nothing of. Our situation there was exceedingly cramped, the place being a narrow neck of land between the North River and the Hackensack. Our force was inconsiderable, being not 1/4 so great as Howe could bring against us. We had no army at hand to have relieved the garrison had we shut ourselves up and stood on our defense. Our ammunition, light artillery, and the best part of our stores had been removed on the apprehension that Howe would endeavor to penetrate the Jerseys, in which case Fort Lee could be of no use to us, for it must occur to every thinking man, whether in the army or not, that these kind of field forts are only for temporary purposes and last in use no longer than the enemy directs his force against the particular object which such forts are raised to defend. Such was our situation and condition at Fort Lee on the morning of the 20th of November, when an officer arrived with information that the enemy, with 200 boats, had landed about 7 miles above. Now remember, this is not, we're fighting British regular army forces, professional soldiers. And all of these people that were with General Washington were not professional soldiers. Major General Nathaniel Greene, who commanded the garrison, immediately ordered them under arms and sent express to General Washington at the town of Hackensack, distant by the way of the ferry about 6 miles. Our first object was to secure the bridge over the Hackensack, which laid up the river between the enemy and us, about 6 miles from us, and 3 from them. General Washington arrived in about 3/4 of an hour and marched at the head of the troops towards the bridge, which place I expected we should have a brush for. However, they did not choose to dispute it with us, and the greatest part of our troops went over the bridge, the rest over the ferry, except some which passed at a mill on a small creek between the bridge and the ferry, and made their way through some marshy grounds up to the town of Hackensack, and there passed the river. We brought off as much baggage as the wagons could contain. The rest was lost. The simple object was to bring off the garrison and march them on till they could be strengthened by the Jersey or Pennsylvania militia, so as to be enabled to make a stand. We stayed 4 days at Newark, collected our outposts, and with some of the Jersey militia, and marched out twice to meet the enemy. On being informed that they were advancing, though our numbers were greatly inferior to theirs. Howe, in my little opinion, committed a great error in generalship in not throwing a body of forces off from Staten Island through Amboy, by which means he might have seized all our stores at Brunswick and intercepted our march into Pennsylvania. But if we believe the power of hell to be limited, we must likewise believe that their agents are under some providential control. I shall not now attempt to give all the particulars of our retreat to the Delaware. Suffice it for the present to say that both officers and men, though greatly harassed and fatigued, frequently without rest, covering, or provision, the inevitable consequences of a long retreat, bore it with a manly and martial spirit. All their wishes centered in one, which was that the country would turn out and help them to drive the enemy back. Voltaire has remarked that King William never appeared to full advantage, but in difficulties and in action. The same remark may be made on General Washington, for the character fits him. There is a natural firmness in some minds which cannot be unlocked by trifles, but which, when unlocked, discovers a cabinet of fortitude. And I reckon it among those kind of public blessings which we do not immediately see, that God hath blessed him with uninterrupted health, and given him a mind that can even flourish upon care. This is why they picked Washington. Washington was not a great strategist. Benedict Arnold was a far better strategist. And he was a real soldier. I mean, he was a real strong leader. And that's what caused a lot of that angst in him and caused him to do what he did later in life. In fact, in one of the battles, he was struck by a musket ball in the femur. And historians had said if that musket ball had hit him in the chest rather than the femur, then there would have been states named Arnold. There would have been great monuments to his name, but it didn't. And what he did later on was horrible. And Washington was a good friend to him, but his pride got in the way because he knew that he was a soldier. He knew that he was a better tactician. In the American Revolutionary War, Washington lost an awful lot of battles, but he won the important ones, and that was what won the war. But had Benedict Arnold been the general, who knows what would have happened. But it was that pride that got in the way. It's what was his downfall. But Washington was a very even-keeled person. He was he had a very gentle way about him. He had a way of bringing sides together that people wouldn't have bet could be brought together. He was a good first president and a good general. But before the line of irrecoverable separation be drawn between us, let us reason the matter together. Your conduct is an invitation to the enemy, yet not 1 in 1,000 of you has heart enough to join him. Howe is as much deceived by you as the American cause is injured by you. He's talking about the Tories. He expects you will all take up arms and flock to his standard with muskets on your shoulders. Your opinions are of no use to him unless you support him personally, for 'tis soldiers and not Tories that he wants. Did I miss a part? That's why that didn't make sense to me. Okay, while I'm reading this, understand the Tories were still loyal to the crown, still wanted to be in the crown. And one of the problems is when the British attacked, they attacked in the center of the colonies. They didn't go to the south, they didn't go to the north, they attacked into the center because they felt that if they did that, that a lot of the Tories, a lot of the people that were loyal to the crown would fall in with them and actually give up their neighbors and their countrymen that were the Whigs that were fighting. Now what happened was that was a big blunder in their strategy. Later on, they had a southern invasion, which they came into the southern parts. And when they came in, a lot of the Tories were happy to see the Redcoats, and they were cheering them on. But the Redcoats would come in, they would come into a farm, they would take over the farmhouse, they would cause, they would do despicable things to the women and children, they would kill the men, they would eat everything on the farm, and they would burn it down as they marched north. That's when they lost a lot of support in the colonies. A lot of the Tories at that point in time then were not proud to be Tories. I shall conclude this paper with some miscellaneous remarks on the state of our affairs, and shall begin with asking the following question. Why is it that the enemy have left the New England provinces and made these middle ones the seat of war? The answer is easy. The New England is not infested with Tories, and we are. I have been tender in raising the cry against these men and used numberless arguments to show them their danger, but it will not do to sacrifice a world either to their folly or their baseness. The period is now arrived in which either they or we must change our sentiments, or one or both must fall. And what is a Tory? Good God, what is he? I should not be afraid to go with 100 Whigs against 1,000 Tories. Were they to attempt to get into arms, every Tory is a coward. For servile, slavish, self-interested fear is the foundation of Toryism, and a man under such influence, though he may be cruel, never can be brave. Does that fit for today? Sure does. I love it when Antifa goes, well, we're going to take on those conservatives. Okay, Cupcake, bring it on. But before the line of irrecoverable separation be drawn between us, let us reason the matter together. Your conduct is an invitation to the enemy, yet not 1 in 1,000 of you has heart enough to join him. We've got the same problem, right? The woke crowd is an invitation to the enemy. How is as much deceived by you as the American cause is injured by you? He expects you will all take up arms and flock to his standard with muskets on your shoulders. Your opinions are of no use to him unless you support him personally, for 'tis soldiers, not Tories, that he wants. I once felt all that kind of anger which a man ought to feel against the mean principles that are held by the Tories. A noted one, who kept a tavern at Amboy, was standing at his door with as pretty a child in his hand, about 8 or 9 years old, as I ever saw, and after speaking his mind as freely as he thought was prudent, finished with this unfatherly expression, well, give me peace in my day. Not a man lives on this continent but fully believes that a separation must sometime or other finally take place, and a generous parent should have said, if there must be trouble, let it be in my day, that my child may have peace. And this single reflection, well applied, is sufficient to awaken every man to duty. Not a place upon earth might be so happy as America. Her situation is remote from all the wrangling world, and she has nothing to do but to trade with them. A man can distinguish himself between temper and principle, and I am as confident as I am that God governs the world, that America will never be happy till she gets clear of foreign dominion. Wars without ceasing will break out till that period arrives, and the continent must in the end be conquered. For though the flame of liberty may sometimes cease to shine, the coal can never be expired, or can never expire. So think about that. If there is to be conflict, let it happen in my day so that my children may live in peace. The Tory had a completely different idea, and that was, I want peace for me. I don't care about my children, all right? I don't care that it's a $36 trillion deficit As long as you don't tax me, I don't care if my kids and my grandkids and great-grandkids have to pay for it. They're Tories nonetheless. They're Tories that will do that. The other thing it says, we have nothing to do but trade with the rest of the world. As I am that, God governs the world, that America will never be happy till she gets clear of foreign dominion. Clear of foreign dominion. What do we have now in America? We've got a lot of foreign dominion, don't we? We've got way too much foreign influence in America. And do you see what he was talking about? That the wars rage when foreign dominion was here. Then we had a period of liberty. And what have we sank back into? These words are pretty poignant. America did not, nor does not, want force, but she wanted a proper application of that force. Wisdom is not the purchase of a day, and it is no wonder that we should err at the first setting off. From an excess of tenderness, we were unwilling to raise an army, and trusted our cause to the temporary defense of a well-meaning militia. A summer's experience has now taught us better. Yet with those troops, while they were collected, we were able to set bounds to the progress of the enemy. And thank God, they are again assembling. I always considered militia as the best troops in the world for a sudden exertion, but they will not do for a long campaign. We didn't have regular soldiers. Howe, it is probable, will make an attempt on this city, Philadelphia. Should he fail on this side of the Delaware, he is ruined. If he succeeds, our cause is not ruined. He stakes all on his side against a part on ours. Admitting he succeeds, the consequence will be that armies from both ends of the continent will march to assist their suffering friends in the Middle States. For he cannot go everywhere. It is impossible. I consider Howe as the greatest enemy the Tories have. He is bringing a war into their country, which, had it not been for him and partly for themselves, they had been clear of. Should he now be expelled, I wish with all the devotion of a Christian that the names of Whig and Tory may never more be mentioned. But should the Tories give him encouragement to come, or assistance if he come, I as sincerely wish that our next year's arms may expel them from the continent, and the Congress appropriate their possessions to the relief of those who have suffered in well-doing. A single successful battle next year will settle the whole. America could carry on 2 years, for 2 years' war by the confiscation of the property of the disaffected persons, and be happy by their expulsion. Say not that this is revenge, call it rather the soft resentment of a suffering people who, having no object in view but the good of all, have staked their own all upon a seemingly doubtful event. Yet it is folly to argue against determined hardness. Eloquence may strike the ear, and the language of sorrow draw forth the tear of compassion, but nothing can reach the heart that is steeled with prejudice. Quitting this class of men, I turn with the warm ardor of a friend to those who have nobly stood and are yet determined to stand the matter out. I call not upon a few, but upon all, not on this state or that state, but on every state. Up and help us. Lay your shoulders to the wheel. Better have too much force than too little, when so great an object is at stake. Let it be told to the future world that in the depth of winter, when nothing but hope and virtue could survive, that the city and the country, alarmed at one common danger, came forth to meet and to repulse it. Say not that thousands are gone. Turn out your tens of thousands. Throw not the burden of the day upon providence, but show your faith by your works. that God may bless you. It matters not where you live or what rank of life you hold. The evil or the blessing will reach you all, the far and the near, the home counties and the back, the rich and the poor will suffer or rejoice alike. The heart that feels not now is dead. The blood of his children will curse his cowardice, who shrinks back at a time when a little might have saved the whole and made them happy. This is one of the things I preach on ad nauseum, and that is, in the 20th century, our churches taught us don't get involved, set